They marched with urgency, not carrying signs of protest, but wielding knives, muskets, and makeshift weapons torn from market stalls. Cannons dragged through the mud echoed with a growing fervor. When they reached the gilded gates of the palace, their demand was clear and piercing. Give us bread. Hours later, the royal family found themselves forced into a carriage, paraded back to Paris at gunpoint, a king humiliated, a monarchy shattered, all ignited by the price of a loaf of bread. This was 1789, but the tale of bread and political upheaval extends thousands of years before. Around 14,000 years ago, life in the Jordan River Valley revolved around survival, not bread. The Nufian people, semi-nomadic hunter-gatherers in what is now Jordan, Israel, and Syria, embarked on a journey that would alter humanity's course forever. They began grinding wild grains between flat stones. In 2018, archaeologists unearthed charred bread fragments at a site named Shubanka, dating back roughly 14,400 years, marking them as the oldest evidence. What astonished researchers was that these remnants predated agriculture by at least 4,000 years. The Nufians were not cultivating wheat. They gathered wild corn and barley from the hillsides. They crushed tiny seeds into a rough paste, mixed it with water, and baked flat discs of dough over heated stones by open fires. The result was dense, gritty bread, perhaps akin to a cracker made from sand and good intentions. Yet it was calorie-dense, portable, and stored longer than raw grain. A crucial advantage creating this bread was labor-intensive. Grinding grain between two stones, a saddle quern, demanded brutal physical effort. Skeletal remains of Nufians revealed severe wear on knees, backs, and joints, marks of hours spent hunched over grinding stones. This labor etched itself into human bodies long before history began recording such struggles. The resulting flour was rough, containing tiny stone fragments that wore down teeth over years of consumption. Dental studies of ancient remains from the Levant showed despite the toll, the Nufians continued their labor. They crushed grain, mixed dough, built fires, and baked those flat, heavy cakes on hot stones. A question lingers. Why endure such hardship when raw grain or porridge sufficed? The answer reveals itself. Bread was easier to carry, share, and lasted longer than alternatives. It was humanity's first food technology, working well enough that people sacrificed their joints, and this story takes an unexpected turn. Some researchers now propose that bread did not emerge because humans had domesticated wheat. Rather, the craving for reliable bread may have catalyzed the beginnings of agriculture itself. The transition from wild grain gathering to deliberate cultivation unfolded gradually across the Fertile Crescent over the ensuing millennia. Villages sprouted around wheat and barley fields, leading to permanent settlements centered on grain. As communities expanded, the surplus of grain required protection and organization. Eventually, someone had to take charge. Bread was quietly laying the groundwork for civilization itself. By around 30,000 BCE, the Egyptians had transformed bread from a campfire survival food into an art form. Bakeries lining the banks of the Nile produced over 50 varieties. Some loaves were round, others braided, and some molded into animal shapes for religious offerings placed in tombs within the Valley of the Kings. Bread became so prevalent in Egyptian culture that the symbol for bread, a half circle upon a flat line, became one of the most common characters in their writing system. The real breakthrough happened somewhere along the Nile, in a kitchen near a brewery. A batch of dough was left to sit too long. Wild yeast, floating in the warm Egyptian air, landed on the wet mixture, feasting on the sugars. The dough began to rise. When this puffy, fermented dough was baked, it emerged softer, lighter, and wholly different from the flat cakes humans had consumed for millennia. The Egyptians quickly learned to replicate this process by reserving a piece of fermented dough, a starter for the next batch. The Greeks later referred to them as artophagoi, or bread eaters, a mild insult implying simplicity. Yet the Egyptians shrugged off the jibe, for they had transformed bread into something far more than mere sustenance. Laborers constructing the Great Pyramids at Giza were compensated with bread and beer. Archaeological records from the workers' village reveal daily rations: 10 loaves of bread and a measure of beer for each laborer. Thousands of workers consumed thousands of loaves, baked daily in massive bakeries. The entire pyramid endeavor, one of history's most ambitious projects, hinged on bread as its primary currency. If the bread stopped, so did the workers, and with them, the construction. This was no mere food. It was the glue holding the social contract intact. The lesson was not lost on Rome. By the 1st century BCE, the Roman Republic had transformed into a sprawling empire of around 60 million people. The city of Rome alone housed over 1 million residents within its walls. Feeding this massive population posed a monumental challenge. The farmland surrounding the city could not yield enough grain to sustain its size, leading Rome to rely on imports. Primarily wheat grain ships departed from Alexandria, crossing the sea to Ostia, the harbor at the mouth of the Tiber River, carrying thousands of tons of wheat. From Ostia, the grain was transferred to smaller barges and transported up the river to warehouses in Rome. This extensive supply chain was fragile, constantly threatened by storms, pirates, and political unrest. Delays or losses could incite panic and riots. Politicians learned quickly that the safest strategy was simple: provide free bread. The annona, Rome's grain dole, eventually distributed free wheat or baked bread to roughly 200,000 citizens. The poet Juvenal captured this arrangement succinctly. Bread and circuses keep the masses fed and entertained, and they would remain placid. The Western Empire, once a bastion of power, now trembles under the weight of internal strife and military pressure. The warehouses at Ostia, once brimming with grain, stand desolate and empty. The barges on the Tiber lie still, their journeys halted. Bakeries, once alive with the scent of fresh bread, close their doors, unable to find the flour needed to bake. Within mere decades, the mighty Western Roman Empire crumbles. The grain ships cease their voyages, and the bustling streets of Rome, once home to 1 million souls, dwindle to a mere 50,000. The city that fed itself on the bounty of Egyptian and North African wheat transforms into a shadow of its former glory. In those abandoned bakeries, silence reigns. As Rome fell, bread in Europe underwent a profound transformation. It became a symbol of social class, a tangible marker of one's standing in the feudal hierarchy. In 13th century England, nobles feasted on soft, pale manchet bread, crafted from finely sifted wheat flour. Meanwhile, peasants toiling in the fields outside the manor walls subsisted on dark, coarse loaves made from maslin, a rough mix of rye, barley, oats, and whatever grain remained after the landlord took his share. This dense bread, often gritty with bits of chaff, sometimes stretched with ground acorns or beans, told a stark tale. The color of one's bread spoke volumes, revealing wealth or poverty even before a single word was uttered. White bread signified affluence. The medieval bread trade was a tightly controlled system, overseen by powerful bakers' guilds. They dictated who could bake, where they could operate, and how they were trained. Master bakers in London endured years of apprenticeship, fiercely guarding their monopoly. But the guilds also kept a watchful eye on bakers, for bread fraud was a serious crime. Common deceptions included mixing sawdust, chalk, or ground bones into flour to increase volume, and using alum to lighten the appearance of dark bread. The frequency of these offenses led to stringent laws, such as the assay of bread, enacted by King Henry III in 1266. This landmark consumer protection law regulated the price, weight, and quality of bread in English towns, tying loaf price. If grain prices soared, bakers had to reduce loaf sizes. If prices fell, they could offer larger loaves. Any baker caught cheating faced severe consequences, fines, public humiliation, or even the destruction of their ovens. The longevity of the assay, surviving over 500 years, speaks volumes about the significance of bread as a cornerstone of public order. Every ruler in medieval Europe understood a critical truth: control the bread, and you control the people. Lose the bread, and everything collapses. This lesson echoed loudly during one of history's most infamous. By the late 1780s, France was mired in debt, a burden of extensive wars, including aid to the American Revolution. The opulent court at Versailles enjoyed lavish excess, while the national treasury ran dry. Poor harvests in 1787 and 1788 had driven grain prices sky high, culminating in a devastating hailstorm that obliterated crops across northern France just weeks before the harvest. By spring 1789, Parisians found themselves spending approximately 80% of their income on bread alone. Imagine not rent, clothing, or heating, but just bread. This grim reality ignited a simmering anger among the bakers caught in the storm, were blamed for the soaring prices, even as they faced their own struggles with the rising costs of flour. Fear gripped Parisian bakers. Mobs accused them of hoarding grain, deliberately inflating prices to profit from the misery. In one harrowing instance, a baker named Francois was yanked from his shop by a furious crowd and hanged from a lamppost, falsely accused of overcharging. The infamous quote attributed to Marie Antoinette, suggesting the poor eat cake, captures the prevailing discontent. Though she likely never uttered those words, the sentiment stuck, as she resided in unimaginable luxury, while the discontent simmered until it erupted on October 5, 1789. Market women gathered in the central markets of Paris, fueled by rumors of hoarding at Versailles. The crowd swelled from dozens to thousands, armed with makeshift weapons, pikes, kitchen knives, and even cannons dragged from the city armory. Arriving at the palace gates, they stormed the opulent residence, killing several of the queen's guards. The royal family, trapped within, faced a reckoning. By morning, the king capitulated, signing the Declaration of the Rights of Man, while the crowd compelled Louis, Marie Antoinette, and their children into a carriage. As they marched, women carried loaves of bread on pikes, chanting of bringing the baker and his family back to the city. This audacious march on Versailles became a pivotal moment in the French Revolution, a bread riot at its core. Philosophers like Rousseau and Voltaire provided the revolution with language, but it was bread that fueled the fire. Hungry people do not wait for philosophy, they act. The revolution that followed was fierce and bloody. The king met his end at the guillotine in January 1793, with Marie Antoinette following in October. The Reign of Terror saw approximately 17,000 amidst the chaos. Bread remained a central obsession for the revolutionary government. Price controls, dubbed the maximum, were implemented, with bakers risking arrest for charging above the mandated price. Even Napoleon, seizing power in 1799, prioritized stabilizing the bread supply, recognizing that a man will fight harder for his interests than for his rights. For the average French citizen, bread represented those interests, a lifeline to survival. The 19th century ushered in a different. For millennia, grain was ground between heavy stones at local mills, powered by water wheels or wind, a slow process that produced whole grain flour, rich in flavor and nutrition. However, in the 1870s, a new technology emerged from Hungary and Switzerland: steel roller mills. These mills could crush wheat kernels more efficiently and separate the starchy endosperm from the darker bran, and germ with unparalleled precision. Suddenly, pure white flour became accessible and affordable. White bread, once a luxury for the aristocracy, became available to ordinary people, transforming the economics of bread. Large industrial mills replaced countless small village operations, while railroads transported flour from centralized mills to cities across Europe and North America. Bakeries expanded, prices dropped, and white bread became the standard expectation in shops. But this transformation came at a cost. The removal of bran and germ stripped bread of fiber, vitamins, and minerals, rendering it nutritionally hollow compared to whole grain bread. By the early 20th century, the populations that had embraced white bread developed higher rates of diseases like beriberi and pellagra. ailments once rare in an era of whole grain consumption. In response, governments mandated that white flour be enriched with the vitamins lost in milling, attempting to rectify the nutritional deficiencies created by industrial processes. It was a curious solution, a paradox of modernity, spending immense effort to remove the nutritious parts of grain, only to add them back. In the heart of the 20th century, bread underwent a transformation, straying further from its ancient roots. In 1961, researchers in Collywood, England, unveiled a revolutionary method for bread making, the chewed process. This innovation utilized intense mechanical mixing, chemical additives, and extra yeast, enabling loaves to be produced in less than 3.5 hours. Traditional methods, steeped in time and fermentation, could take up to 18 hours. The result was a softer, cheaper loaf, perfectly suited for mass production. Today, around 80% of bread sold in the UK is a descendant, yet beneath its efficiency, criticism brewed. Many argued that Collywood bread barely resembled the real thing. Commercial loaves now bore long ingredient lists filled with emulsifiers, preservatives, and other processing aids, items unrecognizable to bakers from a century past. The traditional long fermentation, which developed complex flavors and aided digestion, had been sacrificed for speed and cost. Bread became cheaper and soft as the bread itself evolved. Its political significance remained unscathed. In January 2011, a wave of protests erupted in Egypt. Tens of thousands gathered in Tahrir Square, demanding the resignation of President Hosni Mubarak, who had ruled for nearly 30 years. The reasons were multi-layered: corruption, unemployment, police brutality. But beneath it all lay a familiar pressure: the rising cost of food, especially bread. Egypt stands as the world's largest per capita consumer of bread. For decades, the Egyptian government had subsidized bread, ensuring that a flatbread known as aish baladi remained affordable. The word aish translates to both bread and life in Egyptian Arabic, a symbolism not lost on the people. By 2011, the government was spending billions on subsidies, importing half of its wheat. Bakeries in Cairo and beyond produced millions of loaves daily at price. Lines outside these bakeries wound around the block each morning, a testament to the bread's importance. People waited for hours under the relentless sun, sometimes succumbing to exhaustion. Deaths occurred in these lines, not from violence, but from the oppressive heat and the crushing crowd. In Egypt, rising bread prices have historically heralded political upheaval. With past regimes, the pressures resurfaced in 2010 and 2011 as global wheat prices surged due to droughts in Russia and Australia. The Egyptian Revolution was not solely about bread, but it served as the underlying pressure that made every other grievance feel insurmountable. When families cannot afford to feed themselves, the call for democratic reform becomes. Egypt was not isolated in its struggles. The Arab Spring that swept through North Africa and the Middle East was interwoven with bread shortages and food inflation. Tunisia's uprising ignited when a street vendor named Mohamed Bouazizi set himself ablaze in December 2010, fueled by rising food prices. In Syria, a devastating drought from 2006 to 2010 decimated wheat crops, displacing millions, and escalate. The pattern of unrest continued. In Sudan, protests erupted in 2018 as the government removed wheat subsidies, leading to immediate price hikes. Demonstrators flooded the streets of Khartoum, ultimately contributing to the downfall of President Omar al-Bashir. After 3 decades in power, bread once again emerged as 14,000 years ago. The Nufian people crushed wild grain and baked it on hot stones by the Jordan River. They could hardly fathom the immense consequences of that simple act. Their flatbreads paved the way for agriculture, which birthed villages, then cities, and eventually empires. Time and again, those empires rose and fell based on their. Egypt paid its pyramid builders in loaves. Rome distributed free bread to keep its citizens content. Medieval England's laws governed bread prices for centuries. France erupted into revolution as bread consumed a family's wages. In the 21st century, governments across the Middle East and North Africa faltered. Bread's power transcends borders and epochs. While rice holds significance in parts of Asia, it is bread that uniquely shapes political landscapes, connecting continents through a singular supply chain. A drought in Russia threatens bread prices in Cairo. A war in Ukraine leaves bakeries empty in Khartoum. The world has grown more interconnected. The grain and ovens have evolved. Supply chains now span oceans, yet the essence remains unchanged. When people can afford bread, societies thrive. When they cannot, chaos ensues. Every government understands this truth, and those who forget it pay dearly. Bread represents the oldest social contract, the foundation of civilization, and it holds the potential to dismantle it. For 14,000 years,